Imagine quietly walking across the sprawling, untamed surface of Earth roughly 50,000 years ago. You wouldn't just find ordinary people who looked exactly like you and me walking around. You would find yourself staring directly into the eyes of entirely different, completely alien human species. Some possessed raw physical power specifically designed to survive brutal, freezing winters. Some lived completely isolated on remote islands, evolving biologically into something from a dark fantasy. And some remain so incredibly mysterious that we only know their terrifying existence through fragmented DNA. Today, Homo sapiens completely dominate the entire globe as the absolute, undisputed last one standing. We were not the strongest physically, we were not the oldest, and we certainly didn't live the longest. This raises a deeply disturbing scientific question that most people actively choose to ignore. What exactly happened to every single other human species that shared this highly dangerous planet with us? I am about to reveal the chilling truth of their disappearance, but first, you must understand our chaotic family tree. For the vast majority of our ancient history, being human was not just one single unified biological thing. Evolution ruthlessly experimented with countless different, highly branching versions of humanity over millions of years. They had different brains, heavily modified bodies, and completely different methods of surviving a violent world. But one by one, every single alternative living branch of the human family tree was permanently severed. There was no single apocalyptic war where the world suddenly and cleanly chose Homo sapiens to survive. Instead, the true story is a slow, agonizing global disappearance that scientists are only just beginning to decode. To truly grasp how incredibly lucky we are, we must look at the most successful humans who ever lived. The absolute first human species you must completely understand is the legendary, highly adaptable Homo erectus. They were absolutely not a failed, primitive evolutionary experiment as many arrogant modern people falsely assume today. They aggressively conquered the physical planet long before us, emerging roughly 2 million incredibly long years ago. They possessed long legs, perfectly engineered for running massive distances across open, hostile African landscapes. They spread incredibly far beyond Africa, surviving for a staggering stretch of time that borders on the impossible. Homo erectus successfully survived much longer than modern Homo sapiens has even physically existed on this planet. If you genuinely believe our modern species is permanent, their sudden, unexplained disappearance should completely terrify you. They crafted deadly stone tools, hunted aggressively, and dominated shifting environments across massive global distances. But the absolute last known physical fossils of this incredible species date back around 100,000 years ago. By then, the entire global climate had grown violently unstable, and massive primeval forests rapidly shifted. After surviving for a mathematically impossible stretch of time, they finally, permanently vanished into the dark. We still do not fully know exactly what finally broke them, but their tragic end leaves behind a haunting lesson. Surviving for over 1 million years guarantees absolutely nothing in the brutal game of survival. And the next famous species proves this brutally, but first, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button. If you want to uncover the dark, hidden secrets of our ancient past, this channel is where you need to be. Now, let's look at the specific human species that absolutely everyone mistakenly thinks they understand completely. For decades, arrogant scientists simply dismissed Neanderthals as slow, mindless cave monsters lurking in the freezing dark. That completely fictional image is entirely wrong. They were a brilliant, violent answer to the brutal Ice Age. Their bodies were biologically engineered for freezing environments, built significantly shorter and massively stockier than ours. They aggressively hunted gigantic, highly dangerous animals at incredibly close range, living a violently physical life. Their physical bones show catastrophic injuries matching modern professional rodeo riders, proving their brutal daily existence. They confidently mastered fire, crafted deadly weapons, and deeply cared for their severely injured family members. And for hundreds of thousands of freezing years, they successfully dominated their unforgiving physical territories completely. But then, something terrifyingly shifted, and modern Homo sapiens began aggressively marching into their frozen world. Shortly after our aggressive arrival, roughly 40,000 years ago, the physical evidence of Neanderthals completely vanishes. The old, highly arrogant scientific theory was painfully simple. We were vastly smarter, so we brutally slaughtered them. But modern ancient DNA rapidly reveals a global story that is much more complicated and deeply tragic. Neanderthals lived in incredibly small, heavily isolated populations, which is always an absolute evolutionary death sentence. A single brutally bad winter, a terrible localized disease, or dropping birth rates could completely erase an entire tribe. But physical isolation wasn't their only silent killer. The final blow reveals a terrifying detail you must understand. The global climate was violently shifting between freezing cold and sudden warmth, completely destroying their hunting grounds. Imagine desperately trying to feed your starving family when the very landscape keeps violently rearranging itself. Then, introduce a brand new, highly aggressive human species into those exact same shrinking territories at the worst time. Homo sapiens were not necessarily physically stronger or individually smarter than the ancient, battle-hardened Neanderthals. But we possessed one incredibly lethal, unique advantage. We formed massive, highly connected, social trading networks. When the Neanderthals finally disappeared, they didn't lose one massive, glorious global war against our species. They slowly lost 1,000 silent, agonizing battles against brutal climate change, deep psychological isolation, and time. If you mistakenly think the Neanderthals are a deep mystery, you urgently need to meet the human ghosts. Enter the incredibly mysterious Denisovans, a human species so elusive they are practically biological phantoms. We have entire skeletal structures for Neanderthals, but the Denisovan story began with a single microscopic finger bone. Found deep inside a freezing Siberian cave, that tiny fragment completely rewrote the complex human evolutionary tree overnight. Extracted biological DNA proved it was an entirely unknown human group, vastly different from both us and Neanderthals. They likely dominated a massive stretch of ancient Asia, from freezing Siberia to the towering Tibetan plateau. Yet, their physical fossil record is so frustratingly tiny that we barely even know their real faces. But their highly invisible genetic shadow is incredibly massive and actually lives on inside millions right now today. Tibetans literally inherited a specific genetic mutation from them that allows physical survival in incredibly thin mountain air. It is incredibly strange that a vanished, extinct species actively helps living humans physically breathe deeply today. But as a physical, breathing, living population, the Denisovans also faded completely into the dark mist of time. They vanished roughly 30,000 years ago, and the ultimate reason points to a very dark truth about survival. Their fragmented populations were spread far too incredibly thin across massive, totally unforgiving geographic expanses. They were likely slowly absorbed by incoming waves of Homo sapiens, entirely bred out of physical, isolated existence. They remind us that a powerful human species can disappear so completely that only microscopic genetic code remains. But there is one more vanished human species, and their biological story is by far the most deeply unsettling. On the deeply remote Indonesian island of Flores, terrified scientists uncovered something that entirely broke the biological rules. They found the astonishing remains of Homo floresiensis, tiny ancient humans literally nicknamed biological hobbits. Standing only 3 feet tall with incredibly small brains, they survived in an absolute nightmare biological world. They shared their deeply isolated island with terrifying predatory birds and massive, highly venomous Komodo dragons. At first, arrogant scientists absolutely refused to believe they were real, assuming they were diseased modern humans. But undeniable hard evidence proved they were a completely separate species, warped by the incredibly strange rules of island evolution. On deeply isolated tropical islands, massive animals biologically shrink, and tiny animals grow into absolute physical giants. These incredibly tiny humans aggressively hunted and miraculously survived there until roughly 50,000 short years ago. That exact timeline date is incredibly haunting because it precisely matches exactly when aggressive modern humans arrived. Then, just like every other alternative human branch, the tiny, fascinating island humans silently vanished from reality. Was it a catastrophic volcanic eruption, dropping food supplies, or did we aggressively hunt them to complete extinction? On a tiny, highly inescapable island, you absolutely do not need a massive global asteroid to cause total extinction. A chain of incredibly small local disasters, plus a brand new aggressive competitor, will easily erase a species completely. Which directly brings us to the ultimate, highly terrifying question that modern humanity must carefully answer today. Why exactly did modern Homo sapiens survive this brutal evolutionary gauntlet when every other human completely failed? It is incredibly dangerous and highly arrogant to blindly assume it was simply because we were vastly smarter. Neanderthals had massive brains, Denisovans mastered extreme altitude, and Erectus survived a million incredibly harsh years. The real, undeniable answer isn't individual intelligence, it is a terrifying biological ability that sets us apart. Homo sapiens were incredibly gifted at building massive, highly interconnected webs of people, tools, and shared survival ideas. If one isolated local group failed, another carried the crucial survival knowledge forward to the absolute next generation. If a specific hunting tool worked flawlessly, that brilliant technological idea rapidly spread across massive continents. Our absolute greatest evolutionary advantage was not the isolated individual brain, but the massive network between brains. When the entire planet became violently unstable, our deep, shared cultural connection easily absorbed the lethal climate shocks. But we absolutely must remember that raw, blind, evolutionary luck played a massive, undeniable role in our survival. We simply happened to physically be in the exact right geographic locations, with the right numbers, at the perfect time. The other permanently vanished humans were not stepping stones, nor were they unevolved versions of us today. They were entirely unique, brilliant experiments, possessing their own complex histories and brilliant ways of being fully human. Today we are absolutely alone, but only because every other beautiful evolutionary variation was violently extinguished. We are not the victorious, glorious peak of an evolutionary ladder. We are simply the absolute, last remaining branch. If the silent ghosts of these extinct humans teach us anything, it is a deeply terrifying, highly sobering final lesson. Extinction absolutely does not only come for the physically weak, it comes aggressively for the heavily isolated. And one day, if we aren't incredibly careful, the absolute final human species will learn that exact same lesson.